You think you know the story of Hansel and Gretel, two children lost in the forest dropping crumbs to find their way home, stumbling upon a house of sweets and a witch waiting by the oven. A bedtime story, harmless, innocent. But what if the tale was never meant for children at all? What if it was born not in the nursery, but in the shadows of a world? 800 years ago, when famine stalked the land and parents made choices darker than death itself, archaeologists whisper of charred bones uncovered in woodland shrines of blackened remains mingled with offerings of food of rituals where children were not protected but prepared. And in that same age, in the flicker of firelight, a story was born, not a fairy tale, but a memory, a warning. A memory of hunger so deep it carved itself into myth, of children who walked into the forest not to be lost, but to be offered. This is a story older than kingdoms, older than alphabets, older than the stones carved with forgotten gods. A story that survives because it must. And if you listen closely, if you strip away the sugar and the lullabies, you can still hear what it was always meant to say. The crumbs are not a game. The forest is not a playground. And the witch at the hearth is not fantasy, but the echo of something real, something that once waited in the dark and perhaps still waits. Hansel and Gretel. A poor woodcutter and his wife, crushed by famine, decide they cannot feed their children any longer. And so, under the cover of night, they lead Hansel and Gretel deep into the forest, promising to return but never do. The children, frightened but clever, drop crumbs of bread to mark their path, believing they will find the way home. But the forest is alive, and the birds descend, devouring every crumb, every chance of return. Lost, starving, the children wander until they see it a house unlike any other, its walls of bread, its roof of cakes, its windows of sugar. A miracle in the wilderness. They taste desperate, and the door creaks open. A woman steps out, smiling, welcoming, offering food and warmth. At last, salvation. But soon the smile curdles. The old woman is a witch. She seizes Hansel, locks him in a cage, and forces Gretel to serve her. Each day she feeds Hansel, waiting for him to grow plump. Each night she checks his finger in the dark, measuring his flesh for the oven. And when the day comes, she orders Gretel to stoke the fire, to open the door of the furnace, to prepare her own brother for the flames. But Gretel, trembling, tricks the witch, shoving her into the oven instead. Hansel breaks free, the two escape, and at last they find their way home, carrying treasure in their hands. This is the story we are told. A parable of wit, of courage, of survival. A bedtime tale, harmless, innocent. But what if it was never meant for children at all? What if the crumbs were not a clever trick, but a symbol of a path that cannot be retraced? What if the house of sweets was no miracle, but a trap remembered from an older age? And what if the witch with her oven was no fantasy, but a shadow of something real? Born not from imagination, but from hunger. For nearly 800 years ago, famine swept across the forests of Europe. Parents abandoned children not from cruelty, but from despair. Shrines rose among the trees where bones and bread burned together in rituals now half forgotten. Archaeologists whisper of charred remains buried near ancient hearths, of offerings mingled with flesh, of sacrifices meant to appease powers older than gods. And from those ashes, in the flicker of firelight, a story was born. Not a fairy tale, but a memory. Not an innocent warning, but a ritual retold. A story of hunger so deep it devoured children and sanctified their ashes. A story passed from tongue to tongue, reshaped 1,000 times, but never silenced. And if you strip away the sugar, if you silence the lullabies, you will hear what it was always meant to say. The forest does not forgive. The crumbs will not save you, and the witch's fire still waits. This is not just a German tale. Its roots claw through the soil of many worlds. If you follow me, step back with me into the mountains of Greece. The air smells of smoke. On the altar of Lycaon, ash is piled high, and within it splinters of tiny bones. Here they say Zeus was fed with offerings of the young, a god's hunger mirrored in men's despair. Was it sacrifice or memory dressed as worship? Now move north, where winter buries the earth in silence. In the Norse sagas, giants prowl the edges of the world, but listen closer. The giants are not just monsters, they are famine given form. In years when the frost devoured harvests, children were abandoned in the snow. The sagas do not say it outright, but they do not need to. The silence of winter says enough. Cross into the forests of the Slavs, where trees close in like a cage. A crooked hut stands on chicken legs, turning slowly, creaking in the dark. Inside waits Baba Yaga the witch, with an oven promising bread, delivering fire. Is she only myth? or a mask for a memory that refuses to fade, an old woman at the edge of the village, a hunger too deep to be named. Further south in the lands of Canaan, the fires of Molech burned. Children placed in the furnace, their cries rising with the smoke. Carthage left its proof urns buried with the charred bones of infants row upon row in the Tophet, each one a voice silenced to appease drought, to barter with gods who gave no mercy. And even across the ocean, under the sun of Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs led their children to the altar of Tlaloc. The tears of the young were sacred, they believed, summoning rain when the earth cracked with thirst. Archaeologists found their skeletons buried in ritual pits, their bones painted with blue, the color of water never given. Do you see it now? These are not scattered stories. They are mirrors, each one reflecting the same truth. When famine comes, when hunger rules, it is the children who are led first into the fire. Hansel and Gretel are not alone. They are only the names we remember best. The crumbs, the forest, the oven. These are not inventions of fantasy, but fragments of a chorus sung by countless civilizations. Different tongues, different gods, but the same shadow returning again and again, reminding us of what humanity was forced to do when the world grew cruel. If the legends are mirrors, the ground is the original archive. Bend close with me, feel the cool of the trench wall, the damp breath of the forest pressing in. A trowel skims a thin lens of ash, brush bristles whisper, charcoal flecks glint like fallen stars. In one ringed hollow stones, reddened by years of heat, cradle a hearth. Around it, pig scapulae split for marrow deer, long bones cracked in charred carbonized grains that once were barley or einkorn. A shirt of coarse pottery carries a skin of soot on its outside, and on the inside a film the chemists will later read as lipid residue, flavored with something sweet, honey perhaps, or rendered fat. And at the margin where the feasting ends and the shadows thicken, the archaeologist's hands hesitate. Small phalanges, an unfused epiphysis, the crown of a milk-tooth enamel still bright. Burned, but not to the clean white of a funeral pyre. Rather the mottled blue-gray that speaks of 500, 600, 700 degrees, the heat of an oven that cooks, not incinerates. Under glass bone tells more truths, micro-cracking like a dried riverbed. Discoloration that runs from brown to black to blue, a warp that signals the flesh was still there when the fire began. Carbon dates cluster in a narrow band late in the first millennium before our era, roughly 28 centuries ago, when peat cores and tree rings show growth faltering and rains turning fickle. In the lab, D15 N values sit a little high for a child, the signature of bodies living on meat and desperation. A sliver of residue from the pot run through GCMS whispers, beeswax markers, alongside cereal lipids, bread and honey feast and flame. You could say accident. You could say the settlement burned and the bones of a small one fell where the stew once simmered. But the pattern does not appear once. It repeats. Across the ridge, another hearth with the same quiet geometry, a swept floor, a tidy circle of stones feasting waste pushed outward as if by ritual broom. Again the mingling of foods and the young. In a darker pit beyond, a jar tucked like a secret inside a curl of ash, interleaved with the calcined remains of something no bigger than your hand. Elsewhere in Europe's forests, other teams report the same grammar of deposit, not the disorder of catastrophe, but the choreography of intent, bread loaves baked small and left whole, animal bones scored and piled, children's remains in the seam where offerings were laid. On a cave threshold, soot crawls up limestone. In the ash bed, a baby's radius, the color of old slate. Nearby, seeds of barley and kernels of hazelnut explode into carbon butterflies under the microscope. Each site on its own is an enigma. Together they begin to speak a language. The skeptics are right about one thing: archaeology rarely gives us certainty. Bones do not come with captions, and the dead are poor at explanations. Some of these children died of fever. Some were buried near kitchens because the living stayed close to warmth. Some deposits belong to grief, not ritual. But look longer, wider. Notice the triad that returns a dedicated hearth or oven. Food remains arranged as if for a guest no one sees. Juvenile bones altered by heat, not scattered through trash, not tucked in the formal cemeteries of adults, but woven into the architecture of feasting. Add to this the timing, a climatic downturn that pinched harvests and thinned herds, a historical moment when communities grasped at any bargain with the invisible to keep the rains faithful and the wolves at bay. In the Mediterranean, urn fields hold the cremated young alongside dedicatory stelae. In a northern shrine, a timber platform leaves only its post holes and a shadow of ash, but the deposits beneath the posts are the same animal-bred child. Ritual is not a single act, it is repetition, structure, grammar. And the grammar here reads like a recipe: build the fire, prepare the food, place the offering, temper the heat. When osteologists map cut marks, they find hesitations, small nicks on juvenile ribs, not of butchery, but of binding or of lifting with care. When residue analysts lift starch grains from a sherd, they find both the husk of wild seeds and the signature of milled flour, forest, and hearth gathered and made. When we map the sites, a geography emerges: thresholds, cave mouths, clearings, edgelands, places between where stories like to begin and end. Call it sacrifice if you must. Call it survival, ritualized hunger made liturgy. The earth does not care for our labels. It remembers arrangements. It remembers heat. And it remembers that in years when bread was short and fear was long, communities braided their meals to their prayers and their prayers to their dead. So where does that leave the tale of two children, crumbs, a forest, and oven? The scientist in me will not claim a one-to-one map. No trench ever coughed up a gingerbread wall. But look at the correspondences that matter. Crumbs, the archaeology gives us bread, small loaves, scorched and unbroken, placed as markers in pits and at thresholds as if to trace a path for someone leaving or someone who must not find their way back. The forest, our sites favor its edges where the village ends and the old rules begin. These are the places communities chose to bargain with whatever listens in the trees. The oven, we do not find fairy hearths, but we do find heat, precise, repeatable, sufficient to cook, to blacken, to transform without erasing. And the witch. Perhaps she is only a mask for a function, the keeper of the fire and the rules around it, the elder who says when the pot boils who may eat, who must be given to the flame. In one layer she is hunger personified, in another she is a memory of authority grown monstrous in retrospect. Strip away the sugar glass of the children's book, and the shape that remains is the one the trenches keep drawing: food prepared, as if for welcome. A hearth tended, as if for someone important. A child laid within arm's reach of both. Evidence does not whisper a bedtime story. It testifies. The soot under our nails, the isotopes in our charts, the blue-gray warp of burned bone, they all incline in the same direction toward a past where in bad years a community bound its terror to ritual and tried to purchase tomorrow with what it could least afford today. And that is why a tale endures. Not because it is pleasant, but because it is true in the way that matters to memory. Hansel and Gretel may never have stood before a sugared window, but the oven is real, the forest is real, and the crumbs baked, burned, laid in careful lines are real enough that the soil can still show you where they fell. The story does not speak only in flesh and fire, it speaks in symbols. The crumbs scattered by Hansel are not merely a child's cleverness, but the thread of memory itself, an attempt to mark a way back from the threshold between life and death. Each crumb is a prayer, fragile, easily devoured, reminding us how hope can be swallowed by the world before it leads us home. The forest is more than setting. It is the liminal place, the borderland where the rules of family and hearth dissolve, where the old gods still breathe through root and branch. To step into the forest is to step out of protection and into the realm of trial. In every culture, the woods are where children are tested, where humans meet what lies beyond law. The house of sweets shines like salvation, but it is an illusion born from hunger. When famine gnaws, even the impossible becomes believable. The sugared walls are temptation itself, the promise of safety that hides the trap. It is the bait of survival, sweet to taste, lethal to believe. The oven is the heart of the story. It is not merely a tool, but a portal, a mouth of fire. In ancient ritual, it is both tomb and womb, the place where sacrifice is consumed and in being consumed, transformed. The oven devours, but it also sanctifies, turning flesh into ash, ash into memory. In the tale, it is where children were meant to end, but also where the witch herself is undone. And the witch, she is no simple villain. She is hunger given form, the custodian of the fire, the shadow of the elder who decides who is fed and who is given to the flames. She is the distorted memory of famine's cruel logic, the one who withholds, the one who devours, the one who survives by making others perish. Together, these images form a secret language. Crumbs, forest, house, oven, witch. Each is an archetype. Each carries a weight heavier than its surface. They are not random details of a fairy tale. They are ciphers of a human experience too raw to state plainly. What we could not confess, we told in symbols. What we could not preserve in chronicles, we preserved in stories. And so Hansel and Gretel endure because their symbols are not bound to time or place. They speak to famine, to fear, to the thin line between survival and sacrifice. They speak of how the world lures us with sweetness, then tests us with fire. And if you listen closely, if you strip away the nursery rhymes, you will hear the truth behind the symbols. Every crumb is a memory, every tree a boundary, every oven a gate. And the witch, whether she is hunger or ritual, or the ghost of what we did to survive, still waits by the fire in the shadows where symbols are born. If the crumbs, the forest, and the oven are symbols, then what are they trying to tell us? Perhaps Hansel and Gretel was never meant to teach children how to be clever, but to teach communities how to remember their sins. A tale told not for laughter but for penance, wrapped in sugar, softened with rhyme, but underneath, beating with guilt. It whispers that famine does more than empty the belly. It empties the heart. It twists love into fear. It makes parents leave their children in the woods. And perhaps that is the darkest truth of all. The witch is not always outside waiting in the forest. Sometimes the witch is the hunger in us, the voice that whispers, sacrifice them so you may survive. We like to believe we are free from such shadows. We have supermarkets, cities, laws. We say we no longer abandon the weak. Yet look closer. Even today, when crisis strikes, who suffers first? It is always the children, the powerless, the forgotten. Our ovens are no longer made of brick, but of industry and war. Our crumbs are not bread, but promises that vanish before they can lead us home. Hansel and Gretel survives because it names what we dare not, that every society, no matter how proud, has moments when it bargains away its innocence. That the fire we imagine as myth once burned in truth and still burns in subtler ways. The story is not just about hunger long ago, but about the hunger that lives inside us for survival, for control, for safety at any cost. And when we listen to it, really listen, we hear not a children's tale but a mirror. What if the forest is not behind us but within us? What if the crumbs we drop are the choices we make, leading us deeper into shadows we pretend no longer exist? And what if the oven still waits, not at the edge of a fairy tale, but in the center of human nature, always hungry, always ready to consume? If Hansel and Gretel hides a ritual older than kingdoms, a memory sealed in crumbs and fire more than tattoo 800 years ago, then what of the others? What secrets lie beneath the red hood of the maiden who walks into the wolf's jaws? What forgotten oath beats beneath the kiss of the frog prince? What bargain is really hidden in the piper's tune that leads children away, never to return? We call them fairy tales, but what if everyone is a grave marker, every rhyme a veil drawn over a wound too deep to name? Perhaps these stories are not to comfort us, but to remind us that the forest is never far, that hunger never sleeps, that the fire still waits. And if Hansel and Gretel carries a truth this old, how many more truths are still buried in the tales we whisper at night? Perhaps the forest never ended. Perhaps we are still walking through it.